Welcome to the Budo Bite mini podcast, your essential guide to the fascinating world of Japanese Budo, culture and philosophy. I'm Alex Bennett, a long-time martial arts practitioner, researcher and writer based in Kyoto, Japan, with decades of experience training, teaching and navigating the rich complexities of Budo. Musashi is everywhere, on stage, on screen, in tourist brochures, manga, anime, games. But how much of what we think we know about him is real, and how much is pure invention? Well, I know you're eager to dive straight into Musashi the man and his history and so forth, but that's coming soon. For the meantime, stick with me as we look at how Musashi became an industry, how the myth perpetuates the industry and the industry perpetuates the myth. There's a whole industry around Musashi, even today in Japan and actually around the world. Musashi is big business. His reputation still makes money for a lot of people. So before diving into Musashi's story, it's worth clarifying what I mean by the Musashi Industry. Now, I use the term to describe the vast network of cultural products, the translations and the interpretations that have grown around Miyamoto Musashi's name, from novels and films to business manuals and tourist sites, you name it, turning him into both a legend and a brand of enduring value. And of course, doesn't need to be pointed out that I too am a part of that industry with the books that I've published, the research that I've done on him, and also the books that I'll be publishing very soon. But moving on, just from the 1930s alone, there are around, 100 or so big budget creative works. That's books and films, TV series, manga, plays, music and games and so on, centered or heavily featuring Miyamoto Musashi. Now, this doesn't include countless book chapters, essays, references, museum exhibitions, or secondary adaptations. It also doesn't include the countless books, plays, puppet shows, and artworks created about him in the Tokugawa period in the years after his death in 1645. In other words, Musashi isn't just a historical figure, he's an entire industry. Families that I know in Japan guard heirlooms supposedly linked to Musashi, fiercely defending their authenticity. And others claim family ties to Musashi that bring their family or hometown prestige. And if you're living in a place or holding onto a relic somehow connected to him, you've got every reason to quietly ignore any research that might spoil the story and the benefits that come with it. Now, take the small country town of Mimasaka in Okayama Prefecture. Now, pretty much unknown otherwise, it thrives off Musashi tourism, proudly calling itself the birthplace of their most famous son. There's even a Miyamoto Musashi railway station, renamed that in, I think it was 1994. So fans of Musashi, Japanese and foreign alike, pour through there every year. It keeps the local economy ticking over. And the trouble is, more recent research suggests Musashi probably wasn't even born there. But you can imagine how well that goes down in Mimasaka. Fake news. So where was he born? Well, that'll be coming in the next episode. And it's not just hometown pride. People also protect priceless ink paintings or other items claimed to be Musashi originals. Now, if one of those suddenly got proven to be fake, its value, sometimes in the billions of yen, would vanish overnight. The thing is, Musashi really was a talented painter, and his authentic works are designated national treasures. These days we can test paper and ink chemically to check dates, and art experts can spot fakes by the brush strokes. Still, for every Musashi painting, there are plenty of hopeful forgeries. As for his appearance, we're kind of in the dark about that too. There are over 40 portraits of him, but many of the so-called self-portraits were painted long after he died. Now, nearly all of these images were produced from mid to late Tokugawa period, when Musashi had become famous through things like kabuki or joruri, the puppet theatre, and popular fiction. They seem to reflect the image of a wandering, masterless swordsman shaped by such works. Now, the most famous, said to be a self-portrait, according to the accompanying note, it is actually unlikely that Musashi painted his own likeness. The brushwork also differs from his own hand. One source, Bushu Genshin Kodendai, claims Musashi was 6 feet tall and as strong as an ox, which would have made him a giant back then. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. You see, here's the thing. Most of what people think they know about Musashi actually comes from accounts written long after his death. Thanks to recent scholarship, we can at least begin to piece together a more realistic picture. But the legend, well, that's been thriving for centuries, and it will never go away, hence the industry. Take 1737, when a kabuki play called Tataki Uchi Gandyu Jima, or Revenge on Gandyu Jima, brought Musashi's duel with Kojiro to the stage. Now, it was over the top, melodramatic, and historically very dodgy, but people loved it. It ran for years and cemented Musashi as a larger-than-life figure. Another play later on in 1817 called Gandyu Jima Shobu Miyamoto by the famous kabuki actor Tsuruya Namboku kept the daredevil Musashi alive in the public mind. Stories, puppet theatre and novels all piled this on, and even today people keep reinventing him. Now, a really well-known film writer in Japan by the name of Koyama Kundo from Kumamoto, where Musashi spent his final years, once told me about a play he was writing. Now, Koyama is a very well-known Japanese writer. He's best known for scripting the television series Iron Chef, and in 2009 he won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. I think it was called Departures. But anyway, his idea, he told me, was that during the Shimabara Rebellion, Musashi was captured by Christian rebels, converted to Christianity, and joined their side. Now, historically, it's complete nonsense, but it shows you how Musashi still fuels the imagination. So Mr. Koyama even asked me for my thoughts, and in the end, as far as I know, the play was never staged, but the idea was there. The irony is Musashi himself never tried to mythologize his life. Now, he was a genius with both the sword and the brush, there is no question. He did pronounce himself as the greatest swordsman in the realm after defeating the Yoshioka clan in Kyoto in 1605. Well, this was an act of shameless self-promotion, but such was the age he lived in. The superhero image came later, fed by humanity's everlasting hunger for heroes and heroics. Now, over time, fact and fiction blurred until Musashi became a mix of legend and a few nuggets of reality. And it wasn't just plays and popular entertainment that built him up. Pseudo-scholarly works also fanned the flames. For example, in the last series, podcast, I introduced Hinatsu Shigetaka's Honchou Buge Shoden, which was published in 1716, and it's often treated as reliable on Musashi and other swordsmen. It came out about 70 years after Musashi's death and gave a big push to the legend, especially the stories of his duels with the Yoshioka clan and Kojiro. Now, despite even getting Musashi's name wrong, Hinatsu's book is still more reliable than most. It reprinted the inscription on the Kokura monument, which was erected in Musashi's honor by his adopted son Iori, just 9 years after Musashi's death. Now, I've actually included a full translation of that inscription in my book, The Complete Musashi, because it's such an important primary source. But even that only gives a brief mention of his most famous duels. Later accounts padded things out with plenty of invention, so you always have to read them with, well, let's just say caution. Still, they are fascinating, and if you're really interested in that, William DeLange has done an excellent job of translating works like Bukoden and Bushu Denraiki in his series Origins of a Legend, The Real Musashi. Now, among all these sources, two works stand out as especially influential. The first is the Bushu Denraiki, published in 1727 by Tanji Hawking, and it's based on interviews with the heads of Musashi's sword school, Niten Ichiryu, and it really helped popularize both the school and Musashi's teachings. The second is Nitenki, published in 1776 by Toyota Kagehide. The family gathered every scrap of Musashi lore they could, and Kagehide used all that to write his account, and it became hugely influential. But again, these chronicles embroidered the truth. They're really not primary sources, but secondary sources, because they were written so long after Musashi's death. Hawking, for example, employs a lot of poetic license. He writes about Musashi falling out with his father, Munisai, at age 9, getting kicked out of the house and living with a priest uncle, and supposedly never bathing properly because it left him rather vulnerable. Now, these are all great stories, and you've probably heard them before if you know anything about Musashi, but there's no real evidence to them. And the duels, well, that's where the exaggerations really take off. Now, according to Hawking, Musashi had his first fight against wandering swordsman Arima Kihei when he was 13. Now, Musashi himself mentions this as his first duel in the Book of Five Rings, but the colourful description clearly wasn't his doing. Now, the story goes that he showed up with a 6-foot weapon, attacked like a wild beast, and beat Kihei to death, almost pile driving him into the ground. Now, it's almost certainly embellished, but it became a part of the standard industry myth of Musashi. Kagehide did the same thing with the Kojiro duel on Ganryujima in his book Nitenki. Now, he added colour that stuck for centuries. Now, he's the source of the story that Musashi deliberately showed up late on the island to unnerve Kojiro, and that he carved a wooden sword from an oar on the boat ride over to the island. So I should add here that even Kojiro's surname, Sasaki, came from Edo period kabuki plays, not history. It was not Sasaki Kojiro, but the Nitenki kind of made it so. And that reminds me, I should actually do a podcast about Kojiro as well, so I'll work on that in the coming weeks or months. Anyway, back to Musashi. So much of what people think they know about Musashi comes from this blend of history and theatre and outright fiction. Makes for fantastic stories, but if we want the real Musashi, we've got to separate the man from the myth and the industry. But the industry won't really let us do that. Yoshikawa Eiji's novel, which I translated, is really a compilation of all these older stories, and in particular the narrative in the Nitenki. And in turn, many of the renditions of Musashi today in popular culture, like the famous manga series Vagabond and the 2003 NHK drama Musashi, is based on Yoshikawa's novel. There is another important part of the industry which is closer to the real Musashi. His heroic image is one thing for the Musashi industry, but his knowledge, as recorded in his own writing in the Book of Five Rings, the Gorin no Sho, is another. Man, this book has done the rounds and has many modern Japanese translations, including mine, as well as English, French, Italian, German, and so on. So many other language translations. Now, if Musashi was still alive, he'd be seriously rich and living off some pretty decent royalties, I would imagine. It first really came into the public arena for a large readership when it was published by Kobudo in 1909. Now, many others followed, such as Takano Sasaburo's timeless book Kendo in 1915, where he included Musashi's Book of Five Rings. And since then, Musashi's teachings have been proactively linked to modern Budo theory. But why? Why is this book so integral to the Musashi industry? Well, I will address Gorin no Sho itself in detail in a future podcast. But for the theme of this edition, the Musashi industry, I have to touch on it here too, just briefly. So, as you know, Musashi lived through one of Japan's most violent and transformative centuries, yet his Book of Five Rings still speaks powerfully to our own time and our own experiences in many ways. It is one of the clearest vestiges of his legacy today, and a really important part of the industry. Over the course of the last 100 years, it's become incredibly popular, read and quoted by martial artists of every flavor, from kendoka to judoka to corporate warriors looking for a bit of samurai spirit. It's been translated, as I said, into dozens of languages with varying degrees of accuracy, but that hasn't slowed its momentum one bit, it's just sped it up. If anything, the sheer volume of adaptations and interpretations has given, well, extra legitimacy to the image of Musashi, the undefeated duellist, philosopher, and icon of the lone warrior following his way. Now, alas, many of the translations of Gorin no Sho out there are total BS. People with zero training in classical Japanese or no understanding of the finer martial nuances of what Musashi was trying to say have simply paraphrased the hard work of other people and pass it off as their own original translations. So watch out for anything that's self-published on Amazon. The chances are it's total rubbish. But what's interesting about Gorin no Sho is its popularity isn't limited to the martial arts either. In the 1980s, as Japan's economic power surged, even business theorists and Wall Street analysts began looking to Musashi for answers. It's hard to believe in a way, but they wondered whether his blend of discipline, adaptability, and timing might be the hidden secret behind Japan's economic success. Gorin no Sho was hyped up by some pundits as a kind of corporate survival manual. It was Musashi as management guru, another reminder of how his words continue to shape or at least decorate the world's idea of Japanese mastery. There's a great article by an old friend of mine, the late Cappy Hurst, which explains this phenomenon, and I reckon you should do a search for Samurai on Wall Street, Miyamoto Musashi and the Search for Success. It's really worth a read. While we are here though, let me just quickly outline the structure of his book, the Book of Five Rings. Chi, which means earth, sui, water, ka, fire, fu, wind, and ku, void. Now each one represents a layer of his martial philosophy and his way. He wasn't just explaining sword technique in the book. He was showing how the way of the sword reflects the way of living itself. Now, this is a key aspect to Musashi's popularity today and the industry. In the Earth Scroll, Musashi plants the reader firmly in society. He talks about what it means to be a samurai, a leader, or a person of responsibility. He saw the world in systems, how a warrior fits into a wider order. There's a bit of leadership theory in there as well, how to command others, how to hold one's ground. He justifies his two-sword style not as a flashy gimmick, but as a logical response to reality. He says, you've got to look broadly so that you can learn from every path. And also he has the final 9 rules of the way, the methods for practicing the way, the attitude that you need. These all read like they were written for anyone trying to master anything. This could be art, could be sport, could be business, could be life. That's why it's so popular in many ways. The Water Scroll, the next one, is where Musashi gets into the practical. It's about how to train, but more than that, how to live. There's posture, there's mindset, readiness. They're not just about dojo habits, but life habits. And his message is quite simple: be alert always. He describes how to hold the sword, how to move, how to adapt to different situations, and he warns against clinging stubbornly to form. He says, you've got to learn the kata, the movements, to understand the flow, and then forget it. Now that's pure Japanese Geido thinking, Geido meaning the way of the arts. Form is only a tool to transcend form. The second half of the scroll could easily be a manual for dealing with the chaos of modern life. In the Fire Scroll, the third one, Musashi gets into the psychology of winning. And he insists that victory isn't luck, it's logic. Know the ground, know the enemy, and shape the field so that it favors you. He talks about taking the initiative, seizing the initiative, holding it, and never giving it back. And these ideas also tie neatly back to the theme of the Musashi Industry. It's precisely this adaptable mindset that has kept his teachings alive across so many modern industries and disciplines. Seizing it, holding it, never giving it back. Break the opponent's rhythm. Strike the moment that you see an opening or an opportunity. It's not hard to see how that applies outside the realm of swordsmanship. Now, whether you're in a match or a meeting or a negotiation, Musashi's message is the same. Okay, it's to control the tempo, set the tone, and make your moves count. The Wind Scroll is Musashi's version of don't believe the hype. He looks at other sword schools and points out where they've gone astray without naming them, and not out of arrogance, but to clarify truth through contrast, mainly for his own students. He warns against obsession with speed or strength or length of your weapon, and completely dismisses the idea of secret teachings. Teaching, he alludes to, should make learning easier, not harder. And that's a refreshingly modern way of thinking about it. A good teacher doesn't mystify, they open doors. But mystification, well, that sort of comes in the last one, ku no maki, which is usually translated as the void, but I translated it as ether, because I think it's kind of closer to where Musashi was going, looking at the vast, clear sky. It's exactly what it sounds like, the void, or the ether, nothing and everything at once. So Musashi says to look at things from the highest point, from emptiness. Now this is where his philosophy stops being about swords altogether, and it really takes on such a bigger, broader sort of meaning. Through relentless training and self-refinement, he says, you eventually reach a place of complete freedom. You act without hesitation, unbound by fear or ego. So this ku, this void, this ether, is where form, strategy, and even victory dissolve into clarity. His wisdom has become a commodity that crosses so many boundaries. It's been reprinted, repackaged, and repurposed across borders. Yet that doesn't, in my mind, cheapen it. If anything, it proves how his ideas still cut to the core of human experience, irrespective of the field that you're in. So Musashi, living through his own version of chaos, found an anchor in Michi, the way. And he wrote along the lines that if you apply the advantages of strategy to all of the other arts and crafts and occupations, you'll find that in all things, you do not need a teacher. It's not arrogance, it's conviction. And he believed his insights weren't bound by time and place. And judging by the fact that we're still reading him and getting information out of his works 4 centuries later, the Musashi Industry shows no sign of abating. The fact that you are listening to my blathering on here in this podcast is perhaps testament to that. So that's Musashi the Industry, at least an overview of it, where the man ends and the money-making machine continues rolling on. His image has been stretched, polished, sometimes flat out invented to meet the needs of towns and families and collectors and storytellers and martial artists and whoever. But scratch away at the legend and the industry, and there's still a really fascinating figure underneath. So, in the next part of the series, in my next podcast, we're going to get closer to that real Musashi and see what he was about as a young boy. So we're going right back to where he was born and how he became involved in the martial arts, the kind of training that he did, and the experiences he had as a young boy. So join me in the next podcast. I look forward to seeing you guys. Bye.